What if one of the most misunderstood philosophers of all time wasn't warning the world about women, but about a certain kind of illusion hidden inside some of them? And what if we missed the point entirely, not just about Nietzsche, but about ourselves? There's a line that floats through the internet, torn from its roots like a leaf in a storm. When you go to a woman, take a whip. It's quoted with either disgust or admiration, depending on the reader. But what almost no one does is ask why Nietzsche said it, or what pain lived behind those words. This is not a video about bashing women. It's not about defending Nietzsche either. It's about exposing something deeper, something that still lives in modern relationships, in dating culture, in the masked power dynamics we pretend not to see. Nietzsche's writing was no a rant. It was a cry from the underworld of the human psyche. And what he was really exposing wasn't about gender at all. It was about illusion, projection, and the shadow side of desire. That's what makes it so relevant now, because we are still chasing fantasies, still expecting the other to heal the hole in us, still clinging to ideals of the perfect woman, the perfect man, the soulmate who will make us whole. And when reality doesn't match the dream, we turn bitter. We blame the other. We become what we swore we wouldn't. Nietzsche saw it all. He saw how easily love becomes control, how worship becomes resentment, how seduction, when hollow, turns into domination, on both sides. And the terrifying part? No one listened. He warned us, not about women, but about power, about projection, about the seductive lie of romantic salvation, and how easily we give away our soul chasing it. This isn't just a philosophical issue. It's a psychological one, a spiritual one, a personal one, because many of us are still haunted by the same illusions Nietzsche tried to burn down. We'll explore what he actually meant and why so many misread him. We'll look at history, mythology, and psychology to trace how this pattern keeps repeating and how it shows up in our own lives, quietly shaping the way we love, fear, and lose ourselves. But most of all, this is about reclaiming something, not just our understanding of Nietzsche, but our own clarity, about love, about self-worth, about truth beneath the masks. This story is not just about some women. It's about the dangerous dreams we all carry, and what it means to finally wake up. To understand what Nietzsche truly meant, and what we continue to ignore, we need to go back, not just to the late 1800s when he was writing, but far deeper, because what he saw wasn't new. It was old, ancient, etched into myth, poetry, and power structures that defined entire civilizations. First, let's clarify something. Nietzsche didn't hate women. He didn't trust illusions. And the woman he often wrote about? It was rarely a person. It was an idea, a projection, a symbol. Nietzsche was obsessed with how easily we confuse symbols with truth, and how often we build gods, ideals, or lovers in our image, then worship what we created, hoping it will save us. In Greek mythology, there's a story of Pygmalion, a sculptor who falls in love with a statue he carved himself. He prays for it to come alive, and the gods grant his wish. It's a romantic tale, but also a warning, because the moment we fall in love with our idea of someone, rather than who they are, we stop seeing clearly. Nietzsche's entire philosophy revolves around breaking that illusion. His infamous quote, "When you go to a woman, take a whip," is pulled from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book that isn't meant to be read literally. Zarathustra is a prophet-like figure speaking in metaphor, irony, and myth. The line isn't Nietzsche speaking. It's an old woman giving advice to Zarathustra, and even she ends the conversation with a laugh. The tone is theatrical, not instructional. But in ripping that sentence out of its literary and philosophical context, many missed the deeper point. Nietzsche wasn't promoting violence. He was warning about dynamics of power, and, more than that, about the danger of idealization. Throughout history, societies have idealized women in dangerous ways. The Virgin Mary, the Muse, the angel in the house, the pure woman, the good girl. Each of these archetypes elevates the feminine to something sacred, but also untouchable. In that elevation, women are stripped of their complexity, made symbols, mirrors, not people. Nietzsche saw the trap. When we idealize someone, we are not loving them. We are loving ourselves through them, our fantasy, our projection, and eventually that fantasy breaks. Resentment sets in. We turn on the one we once adored, not because they failed us, but because they dared to be real. This cycle, idealize, project, resent, is not gender-specific. Women do it to men. Men do it to women. Parents do it to children. Lovers do it to each other. And societies do it to everyone. We lift people up, then crucify them for being human. But Nietzsche also lived in a specific time, shaped by his own wounds. He fell deeply in love once, with Lou Salome, a brilliant writer and thinker who rejected him. The pain of that loss followed him, but what hurt wasn't just the rejection. It was the realization that his vision of love, his ideal, was just that. His, not hers. He had seen a goddess. She had simply seen a man. And this is where things get uncomfortable, because Nietzsche wasn't wrong to be angry. He was wrong to universalize that anger. He took a personal disillusionment and projected it into philosophical truth. But the impulse of turning heartbreak into theory isn't unique to him. It's something we still do today. Think of modern dating culture, the endless TikToks warning about red flags, the rise of high value, this, and alpha, that. We've replaced authentic connection with performance. We ask, what can I get from you? How do I control the outcome? We craft identities designed to attract, seduce, or protect, but rarely to connect. Underneath it all is the same fear Nietzsche wrote about, the fear of being seen and rejected, the fear of loving and losing, the fear that if we show our real selves, no one will stay, and that fear leads us to control. Nietzsche saw how easily seduction becomes domination, not always physically but psychologically. Emotional manipulation, withholding, games. These are the signs of love. They are symptoms of a deeper wound, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of powerlessness. And both men and women have played this game across centuries. In the courtly love traditions of medieval Europe, knights would serve their lady as a divine figure, elevating her to near sainthood. But this wasn't about her. It was about his honor, his spiritual quest. She became a symbol, not a partner. In Eastern mysticism, the feminine often represents chaos, the unknowable, the void. To master her is to master oneself. Again, the woman becomes metaphor. Even in religion, the sacred feminine is often severed into two extremes, virgin or temptress, Madonna or Lilith, the pure or the profane. Nietzsche's discomfort wasn't he just with women. It was with the ways culture uses them as symbols to justify deeper power structures. He saw that beneath the romance, the poems, the flowers, was something more primal, the hunger to possess, the terror of being alone, the desperate attempt to make the other person responsible for our salvation. And still, so little has changed. Today, we swipe, seduce, and ghost. We chase the spark, then panic when it burns too hot. We build entire relationships on fantasy and dopamine, and call it love. When reality sets in, when the other person becomes inconvenient, flawed, demanding, we withdraw. Or worse, we punish. Nietzsche wanted to break that pattern, not by banning love, but by challenging its illusions, by facing the shadow we cast on others and asking, what part of myself am I refusing to meet? He believed that only when we shed our idols, of the perfect partner, the savior, the eternal feminine or masculine, Could we truly love? Love, to Nietzsche, wasn't soft, it wasn't sentimental, it was honest, brutal in its clarity. It required strength, not fantasy, courage, not control. And this, perhaps, is why no one listened. Because what he asked of us wasn't easy. He didn't offer comfort. He offered a mirror. And in that mirror, many saw things they weren't ready to face. But maybe now, we are. Because the world is changing. Gender roles are dissolving. Power is shifting. And we are being forced to look at our own reflection, not through the eyes of society, but through the lens of personal responsibility. So the question isn't, was Nietzsche right about women? The real question is, are we ready to stop lying to ourselves about love, power, and illusion? To truly grasp Nietzsche's insight, and why it still reverberates today, we need to peer through the lens of modern psychology. Because beneath the poetic and philosophical layers, what he was describing is a psychological pattern we all know too well: projection, shadow work, and the dynamics of power in relationships. Projection is one of the oldest psychological mechanisms. It happens when we take parts of ourselves, often uncomfortable, unacknowledged feelings or traits, and unconsciously attribute them to others. Think about it. How often have you felt irritated or disappointed by someone, only to realize later that what frustrated you was actually something inside yourself? Projection creates a veil. Instead of owning our shadows, we cast them outward, turning people into mirrors for our unresolved inner conflicts. Nietzsche's writing on Some Women is really about this process. He observed that men and women alike project their desires, fears, and fantasies onto each other, creating distorted versions of reality. The woman becomes less a person and more a canvas for a man's hopes and anxieties, and vice versa. This is not about blame, but about a universal human tendency. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, expanded on this idea with his concept of the shadow, the part of the self that we reject or hide, often because it conflicts with our ideal self-image. Jung believed that personal growth depended on confronting and integrating the shadow rather than suppressing it. But what if, instead of integrating our shadow, we project it onto others? What if the anger, fear, or need for control inside us is seen as coming from the other, especially in intimate relationships? This dynamic creates what Jung called the anima and animus archetypes, the unconscious feminine in men and the unconscious masculine in women. These archetypes live inside us and influence how we perceive the opposite sex. When we don't consciously recognize these inner figures, they rule our interactions from the shadows, causing misunderstandings, unrealistic expectations, and conflict. Nietzsche's critique can be seen as a prophetic insight into this unconscious dance. He warned about mistaking these archetypes for real people. We fall in love not with the other person, but with the unconscious image we carry within us, shaped by culture, family, and personal wounds. Modern psychology also sheds light on why power plays are so common in relationships. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, explains how early childhood experiences with caregivers shape our approach to intimacy and security. Those with anxious attachment often crave closeness but fear abandonment, leading them to cling or control. Those with avoidant attachment protect themselves by distancing, sometimes withdrawing emotionally or physically. When two insecure attachment styles meet, relationships can quickly become battlegrounds of power, control, and emotional games, mirroring the patterns Nietzsche described. Neither partner is fully present. Each is reacting to their own fears rather than engaging authentically. Social psychology also points to how cultural narratives about gender roles shape these dynamics. From a young age, we absorb stories about what it means to be masculine or feminine, often tied to dominance and submission, strength and passivity. These stories are internalized and influence how we behave in relationships, sometimes unconsciously mimicking power structures from history, religion, and media. In the language of neuroscience, dopamine and oxytocin play a part in this drama. The rush of infatuation and desire activates reward pathways in the brain, creating intense feelings that can blind us to reality. We mistake the biochemical high for true connection. But as the brain shifts back to baseline, the illusions fade. Reality seeps in, with all its imperfections and complexities. Nietzsche understood that beneath romantic love was often this biochemical storm, which he called the will to power. But the will to power is not just about domination over others. It is also the drive to assert oneself, to create meaning, to overcome inner chaos. The problem arises when this will seeks expression by controlling another person rather than by transforming oneself. The challenge is this: how do we love without losing ourselves? How do we engage with others authentically, without projecting or manipulating? How do we recognize our own shadows and take responsibility for them? Philosophers before Nietzsche grappled with these questions too. The Sufi tradition, for instance, teaches that the beloved is a reflection of the divine, but also a mirror to our own soul's wounds and yearnings. Sufi poetry often warns against confusing the mirror with the face, against worshiping an image instead of seeking truth. Similarly, Carl Rogers, a pioneer of humanistic psychology, emphasized unconditional positive regard, not as blind acceptance, but as deep empathy and genuine understanding that allows the other to grow without judgment or control. This is the antidote Nietzsche pointed toward, even if indirectly: the brutal honesty of self-awareness coupled with the humility to see others as fully human, flawed, complex, and autonomous. To step into this awareness means embracing vulnerability, the very thing our culture often labels as weakness. Yet vulnerability is strength's doorway. It is the space where real connection and love can grow, free from illusions and power games. When we practice this, relationships transform. We stop seeing the other as a prize or a threat and begin to see a fellow traveler on the path, someone with their own shadows and light. We learn to hold space for both, without needing to conquer or be conquered. Nietzsche's warnings, once misunderstood as misogyny, can become a call for maturity in love and power. They invite us to awaken from the dreams we collectively share and meet each other and ourselves naked and unguarded. Pause here for a moment. Reflect on your own relationships. Where might projection or the will to control have crept in? How might the shadows you refuse to see be coloring your view of others? This journey is not easy. It asks us to dismantle old stories, face uncomfortable truths, and step into a more honest way of being. But in doing so, we open the door to a freedom Nietzsche dreamed of. A love not of possession, but of presence. The illusions Nietzsche exposed are not just abstract ideas. They live and breathe inside our hearts, shaping how we experience love, identity, and connection, and often how we suffer. When projection and idealization rule, relationships become battlegrounds rather than sanctuaries. The partner is no longer a person, but a container for unspoken fears, unmet needs, and unresolved wounds. This dynamic breeds frustration, loneliness, and a creeping sense of alienation. Have you ever felt that painful distance where someone you love suddenly feels like a stranger? That the person you once adored is now a source of resentment? This is no accident. It is the inevitable fallout of loving illusions rather than reality. Psychologically, this creates what attachment theory calls a push-pull dynamic. One partner may crave closeness but fear losing autonomy, so they push the other away. The other, desperate for connection, pulls harder. Over time, this cycle erodes trust and intimacy, leaving both feeling abandoned and misunderstood. Nietzsche's observations point to a more profound consequence: the loss of self. When we invest our sense of worth in how others reflect us, how they meet our projections, we risk losing touch with our own identity. This is why so many people feel lost after a breakup or rejection. not simply because of the absence of the other, but because their sense of self was never fully their own. It was entangled with a fantasy that could never be fulfilled. In history, these patterns have been dramatized in myth and tragedy. The story of Narcissus, who falls in love with his reflection, ends in death because he can never grasp the reality beyond the image. Similarly, the ancient tale of Orpheus and Eurydice shows the painful limits of trying to hold on to a loved one through idealization. Orpheus's backward glance, his failure to trust the reality of Eurydice, dooms their reunion. On a social level, these misunderstandings perpetuate harmful stereotypes and power imbalances. When women are reduced to archetypes, whether as the temptress, the muse, or the angel, they are denied agency and complexity. Men, trapped in roles of dominance or emotional suppression, are denied full humanity as well. This leads to cycles of control and rebellion, where neither side feels truly seen or heard. Emotional manipulation, jealousy, and possessiveness flourish. The underlying wounds of insecurity, shame, and fear remain unhealed. Consider how this impacts careers and social roles. People carrying unresolved relationship wounds often struggle with confidence, decision-making, and leadership. The inner chaos spills outward, clouding judgment and stifling growth. But perhaps the most painful consequence is the emotional numbness that follows repeated disappointment. When love becomes a series of unmet expectations, many withdraw into cynicism or detachment, afraid to hope again. Nietzsche's critique was a call to confront these shadows, not to condemn women or men, but to awaken to the illusions we live by, to reclaim our power by owning our projections and vulnerabilities. The challenge is not to reject love or others, but to meet them without illusions, with courage and compassion. This requires emotional maturity, a willingness to hold paradox, to accept imperfection, and to embrace the unknown. Imagine how different our lives would be if we approached relationships as opportunities for mutual growth rather than conquest. If we saw partners not as saviors or enemies but as mirrors reflecting parts of ourselves we have yet to understand. This is the deeper truth Nietzsche glimpsed beneath the surface of his provocative statements, that true power lies not in dominating others but in mastering oneself. And in doing so, we break free from the cycles of pain, control, and disillusionment that have haunted human connection for centuries. Having explored the shadows Nietzsche exposed, our projections, illusions, and the painful consequences, they no longer have to dictate our stories. The path forward is not one of denial or despair, but of awareness, courage, and compassionate action. To reclaim authentic love and personal power, we need tools that help us see clearly, feel deeply, and relate honestly. The first step is cultivating self-awareness. This means becoming curious about the ways we project our fears and desires onto others. It means gently observing the narratives we tell ourselves about relationships, the stories where we cast someone as perfect or as villain. Journaling is a powerful ally here. Writing down thoughts and feelings without judgment allows us to untangle truth from fantasy. Try this. Next time you feel strong emotions in a relationship, jealousy, disappointment, longing, pause and ask yourself, what part of me is speaking through this feeling? What am I afraid to admit? This practice isn't about blaming yourself but about owning your experience. It's a doorway to integrating your shadow, the hidden parts that shape your perceptions. Second, embrace vulnerability as strength. Modern psychology, especially the work of Brené Brown, shows us that vulnerability is the foundation of connection. It is the willingness to show up, to be seen, imperfect, and uncertain. This contrasts sharply with cultural ideals of control and stoicism that Nietzsche himself critiqued. In practice, vulnerability looks like honest communication, sharing fears and needs without attacking or withdrawing. It means listening deeply when others do the same. This creates a container where trust can grow, breaking cycles of projection and misunderstanding. Third, practice emotional regulation. Our brains are wired to react to threats, real or imagined, with fight, flight, or freeze. When projections and fears take over, these responses trigger conflict instead of connection. Mindfulness and meditation teach us to observe these impulses without being controlled by them. Try this simple exercise. When you feel triggered, take 3 slow, deep breaths. Name the emotion quietly to yourself. Anger, fear, sadness. Notice where you feel it in your body. Then ask, is this feeling about what is happening now, or something from my past? This pause creates space for conscious choice instead of automatic reaction. Fourth, reframe your understanding of power. Nietzsche's will to power is often misunderstood as domination, but real power is creative, generative, and rooted in self-mastery. It is the ability to act with integrity, to set healthy boundaries, and to influence without coercion. Setting boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to pleasing or controlling others to feel safe. But boundaries are acts of respect, both for yourself and the other person. They clarify what you will and will not accept and invite honest negotiation rather than silent resentment. Fifth, engage in shadow work consciously. This means bringing to light the unconscious patterns and beliefs that fuel projection and control. Therapy, whether cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic, or somatic, offers professional guidance. But you can also start with self-reflective questions. What traits in others irritate or attract me strongly? Could these reflect parts of myself I deny? Ancient wisdom traditions echo this approach. The Sufi mystics spoke of the nafs, the ego self that must be tamed and understood, not destroyed. Stoicism teaches us to examine our judgments and desires critically, focusing on what is within our control, our thoughts and actions. Sixth, cultivate empathy and compassion. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior, but seeing others as whole beings with their own struggles and shadows. Empathy softens the hard edges of conflict and invites healing. Compassion for yourself and others opens a space where transformation is possible. Finally, commit to ongoing growth rather than perfection. Nietzsche himself was a relentless seeker, aware that becoming who we are is a lifelong process. This journey involves setbacks, discomfort, and patience. It means practicing self-trust, believing you can face your shadows, learn from mistakes, and choose authenticity over illusion. In practical terms, this might look like daily mindfulness, regular journaling, honest conversations, setting clear boundaries, and seeking support when needed. It means holding your relationships as mirrors and teachers, not trophies or battlegrounds. Pause here and reflect. What small step toward honesty, vulnerability, or boundary setting could you take today? How might your relationships shift if you began to meet others and yourself with more presence and less projection? This is the essence of Nietzsche, his deeper truth about power and love, the liberation that comes not from control over others but mastery of self. By shedding illusions and embracing reality, we create space for genuine connection, growth, and freedom. As we come to the close of this exploration, it's clear that Nietzsche's provocative words were never meant to simply criticize or condemn. Instead, they serve as a piercing mirror held up to the complexities of human relationships, power, and the shadows we carry within ourselves. His insights into some women were never about women alone. They were about the deep, often uncomfortable truths that dwell inside all of us. We have journeyed through centuries, philosophical, psychological, and cultural, to see how these patterns of projection, idealization, and control are woven into the fabric of human connection. From ancient myths to modern neuroscience, the themes remain hauntingly familiar. We yearn to love and be loved, yet we often do so through illusions shaped by fear, desire, and unmet needs. What remains unchanged across time is this: the struggle to meet others and ourselves without losing sight of reality. Nietzsche's words challenge us to face that struggle honestly, to recognize the shadows we project onto partners, friends, and even strangers, to question the stories we tell about love and power, and to step beyond them into greater self-awareness. But this is not a bleak ending. Instead, it opens a door to liberation, the kind of freedom that comes from mastering oneself rather than controlling others. When we embrace vulnerability as strength, set boundaries with integrity, and practice empathy with depth, we begin to transform relationships from arenas of conflict into spaces of growth. Remember the myth of Narcissus, lost in the mirror of his own reflection. The antidote to that fate is to see beyond the surface, to recognize the beloved as a fellow soul with shadows and light, not a mere image of our desires. This shift, from possession to presence, is the heart of what Nietzsche was urging. And what about you? How might your life change if you embrace this call to self-mastery and authentic connection? What stories are ready to be shed? And what truths are waiting to be claimed? In this moment of reflection, consider the relationships you hold most dear. What illusions might you gently lay down? What new ways of loving and being loved could you cultivate by meeting others with open eyes and an open heart? This journey is ongoing and sometimes daunting, but it is also rich with possibility. The pain of disillusionment makes way for the joy of genuine connection. The loneliness born of projection dissolves in the warmth of shared vulnerability. The shadows within us become sources of strength rather than chains. Nietzsche's words, once misunderstood, invite us into a dance with truth, a dance that requires courage, honesty, and grace. It is a dance that honors the complexity of being human and the infinite potential for growth that lies within each of us. So, as we part here, carry this with you. The greatest power is not domination or control, but the mastery of self. The truest love is not possession, but presence. And the deepest freedom is found in embracing all parts of who you are, including the shadows you have yet to meet. In this space of awareness and acceptance, real transformation begins. And through that transformation, we create the possibility for relationships that heal, empower, and uplift. The question now is yours. How will you step into this truth? How will you meet yourself and others without illusions, with courage and compassion? How will you live the legacy of Nietzsche's profound insight in your own life? These questions are invitations, not to perfection but to presence, not to certainty but to curiosity, not to isolation but to connection. And in this invitation lies the hope for a richer, deeper experience of love and power, one that honors both our shadows and our light. You have just journeyed through some of the most profound and challenging truths about power, love, and self-awareness, truths that many overlook or avoid because they are uncomfortable, yet vital for real growth. Here, we do not settle for surface-level answers or easy platitudes. Instead, we dive deep, peeling back layers to uncover what really shapes our relationships and our sense of self. If this exploration has resonated with you, if you feel the stirrings of curiosity or courage to face your own shadows, then you are in the right place. This space is for those who seek not just knowledge, but transformation. For those who understand that reclaiming personal power begins with mastering the self, and that true leadership, whether in love, work, or life, comes from integrity and emotional intelligence. You and I, we are on this journey together, a journey toward seeing ourselves more clearly, loving more authentically, and living with deeper purpose. And it is not always easy. It asks us to sit with discomfort, to question old stories, and to practice kindness toward our imperfections. But in that challenge lies the greatest reward: freedom. Freedom from the illusions that hold us captive. Freedom to create relationships based on truth, empathy, and respect. Freedom to step into the fullness of who we are without apology. If you want to continue exploring these themes, Blending the wisdom of psychology, philosophy, and history into practical tools for your own growth, I invite you to subscribe and join this community. Here you will find content that respects your intelligence and your emotional depth, that honors your quest for meaning beyond the superficial. Together, we can nurture a space where growth is real, reflection is valued, and power is wielded with kindness and awareness. Because this is not just about knowledge, it is about becoming. So, will you take this next step with me? Will you commit to looking inward with courage and reaching outward with compassion? The journey is ongoing, and it is yours to own. Subscribe now, and let us continue walking this path toward mastery, connection, and a life lived fully awake.